We'll keep you updated. We'll keep you
Excited?
Woo!
So Sean is gonna turn on live stream and whatnot.
Oh, we are gonna stream it.
Yeah, we are.
Cool, but we're not gonna record it, or?
I think the live stream records by default.
Okay, cool.
Because it's through the Coded Supply channel.
Okay,
So I would
great.
anticipate that.
All right, cool.
I love some.
So how many RSVPs tonight?
Pardon?
How many people RSVP tonight?
About 30, I would say.
Okay,
So it's
this is not bad.
yeah.
Okay, cool. All right. Have I met some of you already in previous events, and I'm not remembering it? I feel like this happens a lot. So, okay.
Small town.
How many folks here, this is your first event at Coded Supply? Wow, that's a lot.
And you found it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You win.
You found it and you found parking.
Eventually.
Or they biked, we don't know.
Are they like?
Or walked. Took the bus.
We're mostly talking about remote management tonight.
Yeah.
Isn't it somewhat ironic that we're talking about remote management in person?
Yeah, I did that. It's very
feel like
subversive, right?
We should, yeah.
Well, that's why we're like.
Anybody else feel like weird just getting together with people in person? Hey, what's up?
What's up?
I kind of like it.
Yeah. It's like it's 2019 all over again. We get together with human beings. All right. So is anybody here a remote manager but not on the panel? Kind of. All right, cool. Okay, we expect hard questions from you.
I actually was really bold and invited my own manager to come.
Is that person present in the room?
I don't think so. Unless he's in disguise. But I was like, because I'm new at my job.
Ah.
I could suss out all his.
So what's in your job?
I'm technical writing at Salesforce. Yeah. Would you like to come in? We're totally blocking your path. Welcome.
So Salesforce is hiring, or they were hiring?
Yeah, they are. Yeah.
There you go. Oh yeah. They did a round of layoffs last year, I want to say.
Yeah, like in June.
Not like
It's
a
been about a year.
percentage-wise, I feel like it was like 10K or so people, so like big but not insanely big.
Yeah, but I mean, it's a big company, but that's
Right.
still that's a good chunk, right?
Yeah, 10,000 people or so. I'm not sure.
You're welcome.
Hello.
We'll be starting momentarily.
Okay. So I'm running good. So what kind of typewriting you got right now?
Well, I've been doing calendar documentations. I think that's not what I enrolled for. They're like, oh,
Yeah.
you know,
Dead documentation for external customers or for internal?
external. Do you work with docs groups that
No, but I mean, obviously it's a development-based product.
Yeah.
I assume we have docs out there, and I hope they're correct.
These
I
are
don't.
nice docs people I know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, great. I just want docs to be correct, up to date, discoverable, and have lots of snippets. Like examples are more, in fact, more useful than anything else. So, yeah.
You don't just have ChatGPT write your code for you.
Yeah, of course, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. We just authorized Copilot at my workplace just this week. I haven't used it yet. But it is pretty magical when it works. So, good for them.
Yeah, for sure. This is awkward because I'm like, I want to start. And now
You're not
but
allowed
we're waiting
to.
for the live stream. We will ask this question again once it starts, but I think, so who is an individual contributor, meaning like you don't manage people right now? And who has people that report to them right now? Okay, so it's a pretty even split, which is good for us to know as we pitch our conversation.
Who's in the middle of performance assessment season? Because we're coming off the new year, like a lot of places do it like right around the year, right after it. Yeah. Okay. Cool. You guys do comp planning at the same time as performance? Yeah. All right. So do you like? Does everybody have one of those guns that shoots dollar bills? I'm gonna get one of those.
Beverage in hand.
Yeah, please do.
So, hi, I'm Colin Dean. I'm the Managing Director of Code and Supply, this here space you find yourself in presently. Please be conscious that this is an active co-working space. I don't think there's any coworkers here right now, but there may be people who come into the room over there or out into the green room. Just be respectful of their space as they're working. Things going on in the Code and Supply world. We've got Build Night coming up on Monday night. We invite all of you to come out. Build Night is more of a social event, but it's kind of like sit around and work on stuff at your computers and yell at the computer, or you yell at other people, or just talk about stuff. Lots of cool things have come out of the Build Night things, including the Code and Supply Compensation Survey. Our compensation survey report is currently online. You can get it at codeandsupply.co/survey. It's a 2022 data, 2023 publish, and we may or may not be doing another survey this year or early next year. We'll see how things align. If you work for a company that really likes to get information about worker pay, and you've got a credit card that you can send some money our way for sponsorships, or you're looking to get your company's name out there in some fashion, we would love to have more sponsors for that compensation survey effort. It's our current ongoing sponsorship opportunity. Keep your eyes peeled to the Code and Supply meetup, as well as the Write the Docs meetup, to see things going on in the Code and Supply world. And we really love hosting Write the Docs. Documentation is important. And I'm a previous Write the Docs Portland speaker myself. So I'm always wanting to get the community together. Tonight's talk is recorded and streamed. So those of you who heard me earlier, we're already live streaming now. So things on this side of the camera are visible, but pretty much everything in this room is audible. Other things. Oh, Code and Supply provides this space to all kinds of meetups at no cost. But no cost is not free to us. So if you have some spare money, you can see the sign on the table over here for ways that you can give us some of that money and make sure that we're literally able to keep the lights on and keep the tech community having a free and open place that everybody in the tech community in Pittsburgh can come and meet up. We run this as a labor of love, and we'd like to keep doing so. But we'd love to labor less, you know what I mean. Make a little more money off of it, just to not lose money. So, without further ado, Rachel, you want
All right, thanks, Colin.
introduce from here?
All right, I'll keep it brief. I'm Rachel Stavchansky, organizer for Write the Docs chapter here in Pittsburgh. Write the Docs is a community of people who care about words and technology, roughly, I would say. So hopefully you're interested in one of those things. And tonight I welcome, come on up, we got Steve Gross, we got John Chu, we got Gene Siegel, and we've got Dave Paola. All right. So we asked the audience before, but I'm curious, raise your hands one more time if you are someone who has people report to you. Right, it's about half the room. And then raise your hand if you're someone who reports to somebody else, but nobody else reports to you right now. All right, cool. So useful for us to know. So just to give you all a sense of who's up here tonight, we have Steve Gross. He's a 20-year industry veteran working as an engineering manager for the past 5 years. He specializes in developer productivity and has worked for both startups and big tech, Currently, Steve is at MongoDB as a lead software engineer. All right, and going down the line, we've got John Chu. He is a site reliability engineering manager at Google, focusing on machine learning serving infrastructure. Say that 5 times fast. He is a generalist with a diverse background and broad experience, and he serves stakeholders in academia, government, industry, worked in robotics, ML, AI, planet-scale computing infrastructure, and performed roles as a software engineer, engineering manager, consultant, and technical programming manager. Okay. Then we've got Dave Paola, who is the founder and CTO of Block, which is an online developer boot camp that helps students transition into technical careers. He's been in software since 2004, and he's been an engineering leader and manager since 2012 in a variety of industries and team sizes. And currently he serves as CTO at Orange QC. I believe I got that right. All right, and then Jean Siegel. She has managed remote, hybrid, in-person writing teams for over 15 years, building documentation departments from scratch at 3 different companies. And she's done hybrid work for most of her career, starting like 20 years ago, working as an IC 2 weeks in person and 2 weeks on site for a whole year. I'd love to hear that story. So Jean currently is a technical writing manager at Latitude AI. All right, so I'm going to kick it off with a few questions to get us rolling. But then I do encourage folks in the audience to, raise your hand, and we welcome questions from you as well. So let's start with John. Can you tell us how you got into management and what drew you into it initially?
So I got into management kind of like I feel like a lot of people who end up in management, you do really well at your job, and you start kind of pointing at the people near you and say, hey, I think you should do this a little bit this way and not that way, and as your peers and your boss kind of look around and say, okay, you're not that bad about it, and you care how you say it to other people, right? You're not like, hey, that's the terriblest idea ever, like don't do that again, but like, hey, let's think about how we could do this, in a beneficial way for all of us, or something more sustainable. Like, let's think about that. And so that's kind of how I got it in practice. But for me, I don't frankly care all that much. Sorry, anyone who I work with on the live stream, about the tech. What I care about is solving the business problem and the people involved in solving that problem. And that's how we get there. That's how we solve it all. And so for me, if everyone's upset and it's not going the way you want, that's what you got to fix. That's what you got to go after. It's not because, your build system's broken or whatever. Like, that's the last of your problems. And so with that mindset and being able to kind of, do my day job, I just kind of fell into it. And that's honestly the part I want to say like the most. There's obviously a lot of bureaucracy and all that, but when it goes well, it's the best part of, my job.
Yeah, well, thank you. Steve, did you also fall into management, or were you like pursuing it actively?
I fought very hard to become a manager. I don't know if anybody ever accidentally became one, but boy, no, I pushed real hard for it in the nicest possible aggressive way. And basically I ended up becoming a manager because I was the tech lead on a team. And so I knew the tech well, I'd been there long enough. I got along reasonably well with my peers, and I had a head for project management and was able to think about the larger picture. And so ultimately they gave in to my persistent requests, and I became a manager. So that's the short version of how I got there.
All right, we'll get the long version later. So Jean, to change it up a little bit on the topic here, it sounds like you've done a real mix of like hybrid, remote, like the whole gamut. Like, in your opinion, how would you say that like in-person management differs from remote or hybrid? Take your pick there.
And it's an interesting set of terms too, right? Because I've been the remote manager for an in-person team. I've been part of a team that was remote on site. I've managed teams that were partially remote, partially on site, and now my team is totally remote. So the hybrid really mixes it up. But I was thinking a lot about this, and the basic management, like planning the work, tracking the work, doing status reports, that stuff, that doesn't really matter, right? Nobody's going to hand me a document and watch me review it. That all happens offline. The biggest difference is the communication, and both require communication, but just the different channels. Like when you're managing, when any part of the group is remote and not co-located, you have to set up different channels. But the most important thing, I think, is having the channels, having regularly scheduled one-on-ones, having regular scheduled team meetings, and then also having it's okay to do spot communication whenever you need it. It's perfectly acceptable to say, hey, can you hop on a Zoom? And when you hop on a Zoom, the sky doesn't fall on you. It's perfectly okay. There's no fear. So I think it's communication, and also setting up a scaffolding that the team can build relationships with each other.
Yeah, I think that was people, submitted questions beforehand, and we'll get into that later. But people had a lot of questions about
I have so many ideas.
building that. But Dave, can you tell us, for you, have you managed in person and remotely? And so tell us, like, how has your experience been? Like, what do you find the pieces that differentiate that experience for you?
I am one of those people that accidentally became a manager. We started in 2012 as a venture-backed online developer boot camp, before developer boot camps were a thing, long before. And it was like the stereotypical Silicon Valley thing where you had like 4 dudes in a smelly house, like writing code, right? And so like in that environment, you don't really need to manage. I mean, could have used some management, but we didn't really have managers, right? And then as time went on and we started to hire, over time, my IC responsibilities dwindled and my management responsibilities grew. So like, what's the difference, or like what is common? I mean, I actually think I think your point is excellently, very well made. Like communication structures when you are remote need to be like formalized, right? And like there's really that lack of serendipity, which I actually still really struggle with today. I love remote work as a programmer, as an IC. I love working remotely and asynchronously and not having to show up to meetings if I don't feel that they're helpful to me. But having been on the other side, like I totally understand management by walking around, and I very badly miss that from the office, the in-person office. So yeah, I forget your question, but I don't know.
No, that works. I'm curious if any of you, and you maybe raise your hand if you're interested in answering this one, have experienced a pitfall that you would say you've seen a manager fall into, and maybe don't name names, but if you've seen somebody make a decision that you're like, oh, that was something that I might disagree with, or maybe it's something that you did as a manager that you feel like you fell into as a pitfall, either yourself or somebody else. And how do you think that you could have played that differently, or they could have played it differently?
Are you interested in that with respect to remote management, or just is a general management question?
I mean, if you have a remote management answer, we are on a panel about remote management, but I think the topic in general is interesting.
I've just screwed up so many times.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think of the best example.
I can tell a very quick one.
Yeah, you go.
I apologize. I don't know how many folks in the room are developers and how many folks are not developers. But I remember in 2013, I think it was, as I mentioned earlier, I was like very new to management, and I had a team of like 4 or 5 developers. Some of them were back-end developers, some of them were front-end developers, but Ruby on Rails application. And we had a Backbone JS front-end, if you remember Backbone, if you're involved in tech. And they all 4 cornered me literally in the conference room and said, we have to rewrite our whole front end in this new technology. This new technology is backed by a major technology company, so it's going to be around for a long time. It's open source, so all the developer tooling is going to be of the highest caliber. Right? And it's the future. It's the wave of the future, right? It's going to be easier to hire. The recruiting challenge is going to be a lot more, a lot easier. And that framework was called AngularJS. And so they made what I thought was a good argument. Nary anywhere a mention of trade-offs or costs, just benefit after benefit after benefit, right? And so we did it. We spent like 4 months and we rewrote the whole thing to to the tune of the salary of 4 or 5 full-time engineers. No new value delivered to the customers, nothing like that, right? And then wouldn't you know it, like a year and a half later, the same group of people cornered me and said, we have to regret our front end. There's a new framework that's come out. It's backed by a major technology company. It's open source. It's the wave of the future, right? Now that framework is called React. And so I remember thinking, I don't know. I think we need to have a better way to make these technical decisions. So that first example was like the example of a mistake that I made that was quite costly.
Yeah, I think making decisions as a manager and having a clear decision point is a true organizational challenge in a lot of places, for sure. Jean, have you seen yourself or someone else make a choice that, as a manager, that you're like, oh, I learned from that somehow? I think that's what we're looking to take away here is like what can we learn from it?
I mean, I struggle with leading meetings that are more than 5 or 6 people. If there's too much heated discussion, if there's no discussion, and it's even harder when it's hybrid is the worst, right? Some on Zoom, some in the room. And there's been many times that I have not handled it. I should have stepped in sooner. I should have had my rehearsed speech about behaving professionally, whatever. And have I learned? Well, I'm trying, but it's slow. Like, this is just not in my wheelhouse. I'm working on it. I can do the one-on-one, like after something explodes, having one-on-ones with all the people, tracking, checking in, but it's just hard. The one case I got, it was the whole team, right? And so I had 3 different people that didn't really work with each other and hadn't built relationships go create some team norms, go figure out, like, let's get a scaffold together for our meeting and what to do. And they took it and ran with it a different direction than I even would have thought of. They were in charge of socializing. They were bought in, so they kept it going. So fixing my messes, I was okay.
Yeah, it's almost like behavior management as a teacher in a classroom once you get to like critical mass of people in a meeting. It sounds like you were trying to build the structures to make that successful. So that, again, was a common theme of questions that people had about building culture and like touch points with the team remotely. So John, I don't know, would you want to touch on that point? Like, what's one of the ways that you found to kind of build team culture?
Well, I'll actually tie it to the mistake I made, and similar to kind of naturally falling into a role or coming out of being a tech lead and having, what seemingly at the time were brilliant ideas, and you were able to rally everyone around you. One of the big mistakes is that now that you're in front of them and you have the authority, is not always to wield it and sit there and tell everyone what to do. And that ties into the culture piece, because that's very prescriptive, and you're forcing what happens, and you don't necessarily have to buy it. And so, as a manager, sometimes you forget that you actually have the final say, the authority, the trump card, whatever, the approval, and you can let the discussion go. You can get the buy-in, and maybe you might have missed something. Maybe the team comes up with a better idea than you had, or they come up with a creative solution that is roughly the same, but like I said, I don't really care about the tech. I'm not overly invested in it. You can pick, but having the patience to frankly shut up and wait and be awkward and let the silence sit. There are engineers who can absolutely play chicken with me and will beat me all the time. But just taking it the extra 5 seconds and seeing one of those people to say, yeah, I do have that idea. And to create that norm so that it's, I won't say seemingly bottom up, it actually is, but it's seemingly bottom up. But you haven't, again, as a manager, your backyard is like, no, that doesn't align with business priorities. So let's nudge it back in. But everyone's bought in because they had that healthy discussion from the beginning. And now that they start doing that, the subsequent meetings, you're not starting with the 30 seconds of awkward silence of, so who's got an idea?
And that's kind of the basis of the question that I was raising, though, is because what you're describing is like a healthy team, where people are willing to kind of put themselves out there and share their ideas and be vulnerable, and then maybe have you shut them down. But like, how for Steve, I don't know if you have thoughts on this, but like to build that trust on a team, especially remotely, I think is a challenge. And so I'm curious if you found ways to kind of build a team where people feel like they can say to John, I disagree with you, or what have you.
Okay, I feel like there's two questions in there. One was how to build trust in a team, and one was how to encourage people to be able to disagree with each other.
Yes.
And those are certainly related, but they, to my mind, they are distinct questions. So let me answer the first one. Okay, so building trust in a team. I've got a couple techniques that I use, and I'd like to think that they're working out well. Number one is I celebrate things that I screw up very publicly. So, and I'm talking about myself personally. So, like, if I try to solve a technical problem and fail, or in the course learn a new thing, I will in the team meeting volunteer. Hey, folks, let me tell you what I did last week. I spent an afternoon chasing the wrong solution, but I eventually found the right one. Woo, isn't that great? So I will volunteer myself as tribute and show myself as an okay engineer who's learning. That typically makes people feel more comfortable talking about their own challenges. I also ask people in group settings to celebrate their wins. What this means is, John, hey, that was really cool work you did last week. In the next team meeting, could you talk about it for 3 minutes? Sure, Steve, I'd love to do that. Then we get to the team meeting, and I'll have queued him up a little bit. John did this really cool thing last week. Can you talk about it? John's junior, he does a shitty job explaining what he did, and then I try to augment it. Point is, we're celebrating wins, I'm encouraging.
And I still do that.
Oh yeah, it's okay. There you go. So those are two techniques. Emphasizing the learning process as itself inherently valuable, natural to our work, and a thing that we all engage in. I'd like to believe improves trust.
Okay, so that was the trust piece.
Yep.
I guess to kind of poke at you a little bit on this, like in terms of remote, do you think that there are ways that you are, because what you just said could happen in person, remote, hybrid, which is great, but are there things that are unique about managing a team remotely that you find that you need to do to build trust?
Trust, one aspect of trust is it is built over time through frequent interactions with your colleagues. Remote work inherently has fewer interactions with your colleagues. Therefore, it's inherently harder to build trust in a remote environment. So as managers, the trick is to encourage interactions as much as you can. Mm-hmm. What does that mean? There's a million ways, right? Try to make team meetings fun. Try to get a budget for fun online stuff we can do together. Try to encourage people to pair up. The pairing sessions can be very effective. It's a little tricky to like tell people, I order you to go pair with your colleague, but I won't be present for that meeting, but please do it anyway. But you can. Those frequent touch points. If you make it clear that an element of their performance evaluation is their participation in team level code reviews, then they have an incentive to participate in the shared activity of code review. And that's another touch point that builds trust over time. So I feel like those tactics have been successful.
So Dave, for you, it seems like you've managed some contractors, if I remember correctly. I don't know if you had different techniques that you've used with your teams, just because of maybe a different type of relationship, the type of stuff you were working on.
That is an excellent question, because I currently have a team where I struggle with that actually quite a bit, and I've been working through that. Much of my experience is with full-time employees, and a lot of my the tools in my toolbox sort of assume that if you're on the team, you're on the team, and you are thinking about the problems at work in the shower or on your walk with your dog or whatever. And I found that. Well, what I'm challenged with now is I'm going into a new organization where that expectation with contractors has not been set, and so I have to sort of, in some cases, hit the reset button on the culture, and sometimes that's like, unfortunately, me repeating the same message over and over again every day, every week, in every meeting. Like, hey, yes, you're technically a contractor, and there are ethical and legal limits around what type of work we can ask you to do and how. Blah, blah, blah. But really what we care about is that you are psyched to be here, that you are excited to contribute, and you want to grow, and so forth. And so over time, I feel like setting the context is really important, but I happen to believe that trust is best built sort of going to war together, working on projects together. You have to be vulnerable with people before they will trust you, and vice versa. It's a two-way street. I think that's true of colleagues and also sort of the manager-direct report relationship too. And I heard somebody say that trust is the opposite of communication. In other words, like if you really trust somebody, maybe informal communication, you don't need to communicate as much, or there's a lot more that can kind of, there's like more of a shared context, right? And so therefore, when you communicate, you can have much more compressed communication because you have all this shared context. And so if you don't trust somebody, you know, the opposite happens, where you sort of withdraw and you start to be really sort of specific and concrete about your communications and so forth. So
I'm curious about the nitty-gritty details of, like, you have a team, maybe half the team is in India, half the team is here, half the team is on the west coast of the US, and so you've got like really asynchronously positioned folks. I don't know, John, if this is something you've dealt with, or Jean, but like, how do you get people to connect and have those touch points that Steve was talking about that build trust over time?
I had Germany, Pittsburgh, and California, so there was basically a 2-hour window that was reasonable to ask people to interact. But I lucked out, right? My California people like to come in early. The German writer just kind of stayed later, or whatever, however it works, that there was enough time. But the key is putting people on assignments and having them work together. And sometimes, you know, in the writing world, it's like one writer supporting multiple teams. There's not a lot of cross-functional that you need 2 writers, but that's where you do your style guide, your slide templates, training for the company, that sort of thing. And they're almost, I mean, they're not fun projects, but yeah, they're fun projects. So having that go on, and then having fun activities in your meeting that you can do remotely.
That's challenging. It can
be. We did an online paint with wine class that was amazingly fun, and every single person in my department, including 2 that I really was convinced they would hate it, all thought it was really fun.
Now, were you painting while drinking wine, or
you were
actually
you were drinking
with...
wine and painting with wine.
Wow.
So did they
So
like shipped
impressed.
everybody a little kit and then you all dialed in and did it?
No, you had to get your own wine, but you could be reimbursed.
We had a tea tasting class where you had to buy your own tea, so
It just cuts down the.
Yeah.
But I did ship my team coffee in a cup, and and the other thing we do a lot is have coffee breaks or happy hours. Although, you know, when we're having our happy hour in Pittsburgh, California's a little like, hey guys. But one time, and the other thing I do is I have the team decide things, like go find a fun activity with us, for us. You go find the swag that you want. Go do that. Like anything that doesn't have to be done by me, send it out and let people work on it together. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think sometimes it also depends on what your team structure looks like. So the teams we had were, you know, and right now is like there's a team in Zurich, but there's a co-located. And so the connection doesn't have to be, you know, point-to-point pairwise. It's like they are connected and you have slightly higher level touch points, right? Or there's small working groups. And so those can look different than saying, hey, you need to be fully interconnected. And so I don't want to say cautious about the word, just be mindful of how your team's set up and geographically distributed. Because if it's everyone scattered throughout the world, then you have these time zone challenges. But if you're saying, hey, we got West Coast, East Coast, and you know, EMEA, like Eastern or Western Europe, you can say, okay, we have these couple hours of overlap. They can have 6 hours where they do their thing. The West Coast can have theirs, and you kind of bring them together. You hope for, you know, non-pandemic times, and you can bring everyone together like once a year, a couple times a year to meet. But outside of that you have this kind of tiered structure. And then, so that's one dimension. But then as you pick and choose projects on how they interact, you pick different people that are leading them. So you pair them across, like the teams are local and centralized, but let's say I'm going to pick different people that are going to be the spokesperson across the ocean or across the country. And so you can kind of they're representing their kind of local group in different ways, and you can kind of try to spread that out. But that's a much longer play, right? You're expecting some enduring qualities of that.
It sounds like delegation is a theme that we're hearing too, just as a general management practice.
And actually thinking very thoughtfully about how you can make the work asynchronous. Fundamentally, it's asynchronous, right? So
what does that mean? Like, tell us more for those who may not be familiar.
Right now we're doing something synchronous. You ask me something, I can immediately respond, right? But with remote, I can't see. I don't want to be a micromanager, so I'm going to send you, let's say, a Slack message. Is that going to be come back in 5 minutes, 15 minutes, 5 hours? I don't know. I have to be, it might have to consider that's okay and change the fundamental cadence of when things go. So for me and my Zurich counterparts, if I send something off in the afternoon, actually I'll give them a hard time if I see any response at all, right? Like, it's my afternoon, it's their evening. I'm just not going to see anything till the following morning. That's what I expect. So if you think about a back and forth conversation, round trip time, if you say East Coast, West Coast, and Zurich, that's 24 hours. So how many cycles do you need to do to get this question answered? So maybe I have to do more work up front, do a little bit more exploration of my own, divide the work slightly differently so that the touch points, the synchronization points, when we have to have high bandwidth, then you defer them all until when you have the 30 minutes with them. Not, hey, I need 5 minutes, just this one quick question. I'm not gonna, that's quick in 23 hours from now.
Yeah, it's a challenge.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This kind of tags along to that topic of async versus like actual meetings, or when you're building new team culture or something. But what is your tipping point, or when do you say like, okay, now we need an on-site, or we need to get together for meetings specifically? Like, typically if I'm working async and I just like the communication errors are just coming, then I'm like, all right, let's just get on a call. And then there's the next stage of getting in person. Do you have methods for how you typically would manage that for everyone?
Yeah, who wants to take that, like the cadence, I guess?
My threshold is 24 hours. So if the thread has gone for more than 24 hours, just get a meeting. Just do it.
But I think you were saying, like, how often do you get your team together on site or at a location?
Also, yes, like some people say quarterly. We always get together so that all our remote and async communications are usually pretty good because we've seen each other in person.
That's it.
Some teams are.
It's a direct function of budget.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say.
Who's got budget? Actually,
That
so we've
totally
got budget for semi-annual gatherings. So I've got a budget to get my team together once every 6 months. How about you folks?
Budget exists at a level in which a director or a VP can decide.
So there's no established cadence. You just have to go to the director and ask for the money.
There's documents that include cadences.
Okay.
Just a note, like
Okay.
nobody should feel like they need to share details.
No,
of
I
the
mean,
company policy.
tongue in cheek, but like
Yeah.
it depends really where you are in the organization,
Okay.
right? Like
Okay.
it's like some orgs are like, yeah, it's formal and we're gonna give it out to you, and some are like, no, we have other priorities.
Yeah, it's interesting to hear it framed in terms of budget. I am not a big company person. I've never worked in a big company. I could probably learn a thing or two from working in a big company. But so the flip side of that from my vantage point was always, it was actually a function of how large the team was. And so that was one of those things we had to balance. Every new hire we made, it became more expensive to bring everybody together.
Yeah.
Right. But now we do it quarterly.
Quarterly. Wow.
Nice.
It's a very small team though, so it's easier to do.
And Jean, I'm assuming maybe the pandemic shifted how often your teams got together, or
I mean, it was such a weird, like it stopped everything. And I did get, as soon as travel and stuff resumed, I got my team together. And then my company kind of imploded, and then the new company we're going to do an on-site, and things happened. So that got postponed. But now we're planning our on-site again. But it's
Where's it
very,
gonna be?
that's totally Pittsburgh. That's totally budget dependent, right? But having the monthly, like I have a weekly team meeting, I have a monthly department above us that we all go into meeting, and having those scheduled touch points that we're going to make you sit in a room and you're going to have to talk to each other. Now you can have fun or you can't, but it's going to happen. really, really help, I think. Like just having that scaffolding that if somebody has something want to say or they have a question or something, there's a way to ask it. You don't have to just muster up and do it all on your own.
Can I ask a question to the group?
Please.
I'm wondering, when you have all your teams together, I've heard the word offsite, but there's also like the idea of bringing the teams together to just work in the same place. And I remember I haven't had the opportunity to do that until very recently, since before the pandemic, and it was like 3 of us versus before the pandemic at the larger company it was 45 people would all descend on our office, and it like transformed what it felt like to be in that office. It was just like going back to the old days, right? Because everybody was kind of spread out. And I'm just curious if, I don't know what my question is, I guess, but is that a common practice in larger companies, like sort of getting together just to work, even though?
No. I mean, no. I mean, when we had budget, you planned summits, but you had to have defined criteria for them, and so it was a working thing, but it tends to be more strategic. And I want to tie it back to the prior thing of like these escalations. It's kind of like, if I message you back and forth like 5 times, you might want to consider converting that to a more enduring collaborative document, right? Because it's like, oh, like technical details, and like if you're learning back and forth, it's great, but if you're actually making decisions, that might need to be a doc now. Or hey, I started writing an email and it's more than 1 paragraph. Shoot, this might, work at Google, so it's always a doc. But like, let's make it a doc. Hey, we're back and forth this many times. I need to hop on a Meet call or a Zoom call to talk to you, right? And so that was kind of, we had these various of escalations, because if you're writing 7 comments on this 1 paragraph, it's like, no, time out. Get on, I say the phone, but get on, the Zoom call, the Meet call, and actually talk it out. Write what you said, so that everyone else who's reading the document can see the offline conversation and capture it. The in-person, what I found was actually on the culture side, right? That you bring them in so that you can see it all, and you can get a feel for how they work, and you understand like, oh yeah, they have 17 dogs, and that's why they're always on mute, right? And this is why they might take a much longer when they say, hey, I'm gonna go walk the dogs. Right, break, right, and you're like, hey, why did that Slack message not come back in time? But you can kind of build that broader context. You get that working, and then again, the subtext of what a summit or a large gathering is you talk about the big things, the strategic, the why. You get everyone aligned around those, and then you can maybe go back to the asynchronous, and now everyone has kind of that infusion of trust and the infusion of that interaction, so you can get back to and potentially work better when you're now asynchronous. Of course, there are times when you want to pair people, but that has to be at least where I am right now, it's got to be very focused on why you need to be sitting next to them for that long, right? Why did we pair a project from this person, and again, because it's hybrid and co-located, why did I pair 2 people across the world that are 12 hours apart to be co-working on something together? That may have been a poor management choice, right?
Or skill transference. Yeah, I just want to walk it back. The other, like at the core, right? I don't know how many of us really work in a completely co-located group anymore. I haven't worked with the same co-located with everybody I need to work with decades, right? So not whether I'm managing or I'm an IC, I'm asking you a question because I need information, and it's going back and it's going back. And one of the skills is to know when to turn that into a meeting or a Zoom call, and have the bravery, the whatever, this is right, I need to do this to do it. And when you're managing remote, hybrid, whatever groups, that's one of the things you have to mentor. You're really stuck. Well, go make a meeting. And maybe I have to scaffold. Okay, set up a meeting for us tomorrow, this and the guy you need your information from. And then you do that 5, 10, 20 times. And then they're like, okay, go meet with so-and-so and they'll do it. But you have to kind of model, because we all know when you're not getting the information in this asynchronous mode, it's time to do synchronous communication.
One thing I've also noticed, I'm kind of tying a bunch of these points together, is that when you're in person, when you learning by osmosis, especially for junior engineers, you hear this interesting conversation from 2 seats down, and you just peek up and you're like, what are you guys talking about? Like, can I listen in?
It's called prairie dogging.
But we don't accuse, right? Like you just,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah.
But so like, but how do you in the remote or hybrid or distributed or whatever? How do you add that in? Because we know. Say, hey, everyone talk in the channel. Oh, that's a lot of noise, right? Or hey, they talked one-on-one and you solved the problem, but you never told everyone else about it. Like we saw the solution, but we didn't see how you got there. We didn't necessarily get the. And so, how do you get that culture out? Like either it's in person, they had this conversation, they did it. Where do you get that? And so I know I've definitely struggled with it. I've had that because you have all the pairwise, you have all that. But when you have co-located, you get some of that velocity, which is that innovation that he was talking about earlier. But it doesn't get shared. Whereas when everyone's co-located, you get that. And so the manager, I think, has to spend some extra effort doing that to make sure people encourage that culture. But at the same time, without the old school, like where everyone's in the same room, I don't get the osmosis. I can't say, hey, Alice and Bob had that conversation. Steve, go talk to them because they had that last week while you were on vacation. Well, if you did it on Slack, I cannot see it. I don't even know what happened. I don't even know if you were struggling. And then you say, oh, we want stand-ups or we want other meetings. And people look at you like, why? Why do I have more meetings? And you're like, well, how do I make this magic and share those little nuggets that happened that may not seem interesting to most people, but it actually is, right? Like, oh, I'm going to see that problem in two weeks.
That was a question that somebody was interested in, was about sort of monitoring work as a manager. So you can't just be like walking by somebody's desk and, see, okay, they've made some progress. So I'm curious, I don't know, how do you kind of keep tabs on your team if it's not a traditional stand-up every day? What do you find useful? Jean, you seem very excited to answer.
Clear processes, because this is what I need from my teams, whether any configuration. I need to know what you're doing. I don't want to micromanage you. I don't want to, do it for you. I don't want to tell you how to do it, but I need to know what you're doing, because at 10 o'clock at night, I get a Slack from somebody that says, what about this project? And I want it in a ticket, just put a note somewhere so I can find it, because that's the communication, right? Somebody up above wants to know something. I need to be able to find the information. Can you tell that I've struggled with this? And so, I just need to know what you're doing.
I have an opinion on this.
Yeah,
a
please.
Strong one actually, based on scar tissue. And I feel like one of the most valuable lessons that I've learned so far is that the desire to monitor is often, for me, like rooted in, there's like anxiety. It's like, something's going to happen that I'm not aware of, or there's going to be a bad outcome, someone's going to make a mistake, and I'm going to have to deal with the consequences. When you're a manager, you're responsible for the outcomes, but you're not doing the work, right? That's like the primary tension. And I'm going to plug a book. I know how that sounds.
Boy,
I read this book.
Did you write it?
No.
Yeah.
It's maybe you've heard of it or read it. It's called Turn the Ship Around. It's written by this captain from the Navy. He has an amazing story. And the idea, and I think I read this at like the perfect moment in my career. I was like on a plane, so I couldn't get distracted. And we were undergoing some extreme challenges at the company in terms of personnel and strategic decisions that had to be made. And the idea is to push authority to the information rather than forcing people to somehow find a way to push the information up to some authority figure. And this is like very simply said and very difficult to do, obviously. But so I don't know, when it comes to like monitoring work, it's like you give intent, like what are the goals? And if everybody knows the goals and they've sort of proven their competence, then you don't really need to monitor. You get the benefit of like really extreme sort of psychological ownership of the goal, and there's a lot of subtlety to it. Like you don't want to tip too far into, they did way too much without checking in, but I think that's a clear process problem.
So you give the strategy and then you let them make some decisions. You sound like you were about to jump in there, please.
Yeah, okay. So two thoughts. One, I definitely monitor people's work, and I think it's a terrible idea to not monitor it. So don't listen to this man. Two, remote teams are actually easier to monitor than in-person teams. Let me explain my reasoning here. in-person teams, you see people sitting at a desk. There's a screen in front of them. They seem to be typing, and you think, looks like they're working. Of course, you could be wrong, right? And remote work, you have no such opportunity to make that mistake. The only evidence you can see of their work is actual work being done. So remote work lends itself to creating demonstrable artifacts. Show me your code, show me the doc, show me the Slack thread. Those are outcome artifacts that show that you're engaged in work. And like remote work lends itself to those.
But either place you need the artifacts. Like
Oh,
you
yeah,
can't
sure.
manage in person just by watching everybody type.
Right. My point is just that in person there's a temptation to see their presence as indication of work getting done, and in remote work you don't have that temptation. That's all.
Combine a couple of the things that are said here is like, I don't think it's about necessarily monitoring, because what you were saying was like, if you have to report up, you can pass that along. Like there's a reason, the reason why I'm holding, like an example I tell my reports sometimes is, the reason why I'm holding this meeting is because you haven't sent me the damn email with the status or wrote it in the bug or something. You want to lose this meeting? Push it to me.
So
but
you,
it's
you
not
use punishment meetings? I
no,
definitely
it's
do
not
that.
punishment. It's
Just
encouragement.
necessary.
It's a
An
carrot.
encouragement meeting.
It's encouragement. The meetings will continue until morale
Yes.
improves. Right? No, but more to Dave's point is, but the reason why I need that information, there is a stakeholder that is asking on a regular basis about topic X, right? So that is actually part of the requirements. Like, let's not neglect that. It's not just the code. It's not the. Yes, I, as the manager, may need to interpret it, but I need some place that is standardized, right? So that everyone can kind of do it. So when you work on a new project with different people, it's not, well, this person writes in docs. This person's going to write 6 sticky notes and put it on my desk. Like, no, I'm not playing that, right? Like, let's at least get it somewhat useful, but you know why I'm asking for it. I'm not there to monitor you, right? I'm actually not monitoring there. What I need out of it is to know that you're making progress, and the best way is because I'm getting pressure about that progress. If we never had pressure, well, we're not actually working, and there's no money in changing hands. So that input function from up above of, hey, what's the status of, or the product manager saying, when are we on schedule, or you can pass parts of that down and as a requirement for the output. I need weekly, not because I want to know what you did, but I maybe it's a stand-up style. What'd you do? What's blocking you? And like, what do you plan to do next? Great. Because then I'm going to turn that with everybody else's into what someone else needs. And
That was actually a question that somebody had, was whether like a remote changes managing up or like sharing that information. I don't know. I mean, does it change it, or is it, even if you manage in person, you still have to present that information somehow to people higher up, and like, are they going to be face to face with you? I don't know.
I think. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Well, I think the biggest difference is, as far as reporting information up, is you lose the elevator spiel. Like, you're never going to hit the 30 seconds, let me tell you what my department's been doing really, that you can do in the kitchen or whatever. But most of it, it sounds like my company's very, very Slack oriented, and we do it really well because the channels really have rich discussion. And it's not, I like how you said regular reporting. It's not. It's when somebody thinks of, oh, where's this thing I haven't asked you about for 2 months? Where's that? And I'm like, oh, it fell off my plate.
But it's passing it to your directs or your indirects that like, this is going to happen, and it's asynchronous, and no one wants that fire drill. Mm-hmm. No one wants, hey, it's Friday evening, let me make this PowerPoint because someone asked for it. Well, if you have it there that's off by a day or two, do I care? Do they care? Hand wave, we're good, right? But if it's 2 months old, you know what I'm going to do is I'm going to pick up my phone, or I'm going to text you. God, that old references, right? Like, I want to say I'm going to call you, but like, I'm not. I'm going to text you and be like, where is it? Right? And then you have to, log in, do all that to update it. And instead, if you kind of create that culture around small bits, even if it's not much, and then as they grow, you say, hey, I want the TLDR. Bottom line up front, I'm not going to read the whole ticket. I don't want you to say, hey, between comment 7 and 42 is where you're going to find all the information, right? No. This is the TLDR, bottom line up front, whatever you want to say, and know that your audience is, I'm going to distill it for higher. You're distilling it for me. I'm distilling it higher up, and so on. So give me that.
And orthogonal to that is the dreaded annual performance review. So when you have somebody brag or when you do a win, I'm always like, write it up and put it in your file. Write it up, put it in your file. Which, remote or not remote, still, like, just gather your information. You're going to have to report it out, and you know it's going to happen every year.
And if you've already written it for let's say a more senior audience or a more broad audience, because you know why it mattered, what you did, and what the results are, you don't have to go back at the end of the year and say, oh, shoot, these 17 bugs, and that was the only thing I left a note for myself. Let me read them all. No, I don't want to do that. And as the individual, and I know my manager's not going to do it, so you know, how do you get out of that? And it's actually to do a little bit more work, unfortunately, up front and make it regular, right? Like, you know,
So we're getting close to the end. I do want to make sure if anybody who's attending here tonight has like burning questions that you haven't asked, we still have more that people asked ahead of time. But yeah,
I just have one question going. Someone else.
yes.
Just going back to I think you had mentioned, Jean, the kind of informal, like happy hour coffee break meetings. I'm curious, those of you who've had those, like if you make them mandatory, if you like just strongly encourage.
Yes,
and
we're
if
going to have mandatory fun.
I feel like I've seen it at like clients I've worked with, and I'm curious, like how much you push for those. If you just leave them purely optional and have, you know, if only a quarter of your team shows up, is that acceptable for you?
My teams are very, very small.
Yeah.
But I think it's very, very important, and yes, I would push for it. And the other thing is cameras on, which we haven't really talked about.
Ooh, let's talk about
cameras
cameras.
What are your thoughts on cameras?
Turn them on. Turn them on. Turn them on.
There you go.
Please.
Yeah.
Why?
How can I forge a relationship? Because okay, jeez. Okay.
How many
Thank you. I
people-
know.
How many people are in the meeting?
5. Yeah.
Okay, but if it's like 100-person meeting,
100.
Well, no. I mean,
No, I
you're
actually
not
tell-
gonna, what relationships you're forging
Right,
in
yeah.
100%?
That's all. That's all. I'm just want to like
No,
add
I
the
understand.
nuance.
No,
right?
I know. You're right. But I mean, I don't know how you're supposed to form a relationship with somebody if I can't see them.
Mhm.
I talk about like nonverbal communication. You know, it's very, very real. I'm coming from a place here.
We're on the
where-
same
yeah,
team. Yes. Okay.
Like I've been very frustrated by this.
And as far as the happy hours or the social things or stuff, there's kind of an awkwardness, or there's you you need to get your couple early adopters that are on your team, ask a couple people, help do this, and then just blaze through it, because I really haven't had a bad experience with it, but I'm not saying it's easy. You've got to work on it, and it's part of building the culture.
I've had to facilitate them.
Mm-hmm.
Like not like I facilitate it, right? If no one's gonna talk, someone's gonna talk.
Oh, you have to have
You might be a running podcast. You're like,
Oh, yeah.
I was reading last night and talking about what you want, and drop into, hey, I know you're into economics. Let's talk about, and almost interview like the more extroverted, and you turn into something. But the reason why I wanted to bring that up is because there's a group of introverts, and this was very apparent during the pandemic. As a manager, because when I talked to my more introverted staff, they brought this up to me. They would attend these. For us, they were marathons because we were so lacking and devoid of human interaction. They were 3 hours long. We were all working, and we just had our screens on, and it was just the afternoon room. We'd be talking almost like you hear the white noise of people chatting at a coffee shop. These introverts said this was great because it's much like when I go to lunch at the table. I didn't say a darn word, but I felt like I was part of the conversation, and I got all the social interaction I needed, and then went away. So they would join, they would listen in, they might say a word here or there, but they didn't feel super isolated. Again, this is pandemic, so it was really exacerbated. But they were like, hey, it's again that lunch table. I came, I saw, I smiled, I nodded, I ate, and then I disappeared. They weren't left out, and so it was interesting in that regard.
I wholeheartedly agree with that. Maybe that's because I'm an introvert. But I gotta say, one of my favorite meetings ever was a combo happy hour retro meeting, and this was not my idea. This was someone.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah, honestly, and I struggle to replicate it remotely. We've done it a couple times. It doesn't have the same feel for obvious reasons, but we would start out facilitating as the manager, as the leader, but we wanted to make sure that it was a safe space where people could sort of speak truth to power. The leader was there, but you got to talk about what didn't go so well this week, and you kind of got to respectfully throw your teammates under the bus a little bit, and they got to do the same for you. And there was wine. There was wine and cheese, and it was somebody's responsibility. The responsibility to facilitate would rotate week over week, and so everybody got to sit in the seat of facilitation. And you have to keep people on track. What's it like to try to keep your colleagues on track when they're on a hot take and they're talking about a passionate topic, right? If it's not just with wine, if it's not just the leader doing it, what happened then was we all really got a lot more empathy for each other. And like I said, I've replicated a little bit remotely, but
No, that's
So
brilliant.
we do a variant of that because I'm on site reliability. We're more operations focused, so things break all the time. We do an ops review, and we'll say about like fun, interesting like breakages. Hey, you know, the internet went down or if you saw on Reddit about Verizon not being able to connect with IPv6, like that's a fun topic, especially when you have people to geek out and when you're at Google and you know kind of what was happening and who you looped in, right? And so those are interesting topics, and you bring some beverages, whatever, you know, tasty beverages of choice, and you talk about good things, you talk about bad things, and you talk about, hey, this is just kind of interesting.
Yeah, it kind of builds the trust, like what you were saying, Steve, in the very beginning. Do we have a question in the
There's one
back?
in the back.
Yes, please.
I'm curious how, if there's any best practices to documentation, are there any rules that you follow?
Can you narrow that down a little bit?
Like there was a conversation about if it's more than a paragraph and it should be a document. Anything more that you can talk about? So in my company, almost everything was a document. Like anything you want to talk about, is there a document? Is there a link that I can use? So that was the sort of culture.
Well, and sometimes that's good, you know, because it's a lot easier to, if it's a document, it's a lot easier to target a comment and then reply on the comment and whatnot, where that stuff gets really lost in a Slack thread. But we have a lot of just scratch documents. Like you just throw your ideas down and you start passing around and sharing, and they'll grow into something like a design or a process or something. But it's a good way to corral this stuff. And a lot of times I'll take the Slack, stick it in a document, and then start tagging people on the parts I want them to configure, you know, answer.
I wish you could copy and paste from Slack without it copying all the timestamps and the metadata. You know, I do that 12 times a day, and it's so annoying. Yeah,
you need to know who's chatting
But
when, how often.
Does that help? I mean,
Totally.
like John said, it's how important it is, how long term the information is. But, you know, pretty much anything you've spent 24, 48 hours trying to find the answer to is important in somewhere in your company.
Right. I'm not going to write a document to, you know, about like what coffee beans we're going to have. Well, there are people there. Okay, sorry. Oh, man, I don't even have a good one because I know there's enough to dance that'll be like, no. But,
I was going to say something about dogs. But
right, but
that
like
wouldn't
the
work.
idea, like something quick, you don't want to start there. And depending on your culture, organization's culture, are you biased towards this movement and velocity because you want a quick question and get it back and forth? Then you might need to start encouraging people to make it enduring for reasons like that. You want to know how you got here, right? You don't want to just be like, this is what we did. Okay, that's useful, but actually what's more important is what all the things we considered, why we didn't go with them, because when 3 years or you're going to get those cornered in the office for that new technology, you're going to say, okay, what's different about today's world that necessitates this? Like, you know, hey, we couldn't go with this technology 4 years ago, or we didn't choose to because it was too heavyweight. Oh, well, why? Because it did all these things. But now our system, like invariants, should change such that I need that heavyweight system. Well, now you have that archaeology. You have that anthropology. Like, oh, this is why we didn't choose this. Well, now the world's different. The constraints are different. I'm going to choose that. So for me, that's the importance of the documentation. The decision is almost immaterial because on code in 3 years, it's going to be something else. It's going to be wrong. It's just not going to be useful.
For sure, yeah. You gotta document those decisions. So we are at time. I'll leave us with a short thing. So Dave, you already answered this one, but like if you have a recommendation of like a book or a resource that you recommend, and if you don't have an answer for this and you're like pass, that's cool too. But Jean, maybe we could start with you. if there's something
I was
you
trying to-
recommend to folks.
And I was trying to do the lens of remote managing, and I don't have one. I read the Stryer newsletter weekly. They often have good stuff, but
John or Dave?
Nothing specific for remote, but like turn your ship around, and the captain's, he has another book. They're very similar in tenor, but like those were both good. For those considering management, you know, The Manager's Path, of course, by Fournier is like kind of canonical. But for me, a lot of it is just starting with the people first, like whatever resources. And so for me, it actually deviates away from classic management books, and it goes towards social psychology, human behavior, organizational behavior. And you start with the people, because you know everything we talked about here was about building the correct trust around people, building the people, build the people, and that's when you think about your organization. The program managers managing a program, they don't necessarily have reports. The ICs are working on things. The only place that someone has I'll call it the care and feeding responsibility is the personnel manager. That's the only place where they're caring about people, and it's sometimes low on the priority list. And so I always start there, because it's the one that's neglected. The business may or may not care, or, you know, depending on the financials, right? So for me, that's where I start, and it can go sideways fast in terms of what social psychology, where you want to go, how research heavy or how pop psych you want to go with that stuff.
Thank you. Steve?
Yeah, just go on Instagram. If anybody here follow Corporate Natalie, highly recommend. It's just a great sense of humor. Oh man, great. And then I also watch a lot of therapists on Instagram. I don't remember their names offhand. I'll try to find them later. But like study psychotherapy. It's an excellent background for being a manager.
All right.
Or dealing with small children, like any parenting book.
No,
seriously.
not
Kindergarten.
books. No, have a kid.
Yeah.
That's very much more expensive than a book.
No, but you gotta be, if you want to be invested in your management career, you gotta be willing to suffer a little bit.
I'm okay, you know, being invested, not commit. You know, like the chicken. And,
No,
I have a
no,
specific book on that topic. I don't have kids, but I don't know, must have been like a Kindle deal I bought while I was at my last company. How to Talk. I think it's called How to Talk so kids will listen, and How to Listen so kids will talk, or something like that. It's a book like
Insert
that.
engineer in there.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I like that.
or just other human, right?
Yeah.
Like,
All right.
very good.
Let's give a round of applause to our amazing panelists. And so we can turn off the live stream, hopefully. But I do think the value in these gatherings is often in the people that you talk to and meet. So officially the event is over, but I encourage people to stay and like turn to the